Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine, issue 42, released February 1997, and indeed discussing the future of interactive entertainment. And you might recognize the game on the cover. Indeed, it's Scud Race, the spiritual successor to Daytona USA, before Daytona 2 was released, and but wasn't a big hit. Again, a rather subpar cover made by Edge. The worst, even some better ones are, worse ones will be released soon enough. The inside column is about reflecting back on the last year, how technology has progressed, mostly with the Nintendo 64 showing off new forms of entertainment, but also the PC using 3D cards. Here are the table of contents. Probably the best part is the interview with Richard Garriott, who made the Ultima games. Here's some look at what's called Power Crystal, a game that was supposed to be released for the M2. And it looks pretty good, kind of like Ocarina of Time, I guess, but never released. MMX technology taking over Intel for a brief stint. We saw advertisements for the Enix prize, and some Chilean coders apparently won the $200,000 with a game called Estructura. There was also a football game, which became second place, and other games like these you can see here. I tried to look up whatever happened to the winners of these prizes, but couldn't find anything. So Nintendo 64 games being copied, and John Romero leaving for Eidos, which would end up leading to Daikatana. There is already some talk about him making an RPG first-person shooter. There's some workshop in Brussels apparently, how professionals could help each other with different things, but none of that really grabbed my attention. Here's some culture with the out there parts of the magazine, which we'll be seeing for quite a while. Here's some talk about how music clubbing is incorporating video games like Tunnel B1, of course Wipeout. And there's some talk about how they fit together so well, even though I don't agree with that. The Sega Saturn has this demo to show off the Saturn's capabilities, and it's with this female dancing of sorts called Digital Dance Mix. You can find that on YouTube. I don't remember what this is. And here we have some art being shown in Liverpool. So what's going on in Japan? Well, we have a special magazine called, what's it called, Lab or something? Game Labo. It's mostly for people who actually take apart their own systems. It's very technical. I don't know if they still exist. I doubt it. So Enix also jumping ship from Nintendo to release games for Sony, and some talk about new Sega arcade games. Here's a very subjective article discussing how it's hard to use the internet at the moment using 28K modems, and they lament how technology will increase the speed of internet, but at the same time games will become more complicated. Quake at the time being the biggest game on the web. So here's Richard Garriott and his big building Origin, making fantastic games at the time. And Richard has a lot to say. He proves how much of a geek he is. He's also very well known he knows very well what's going on in the gaming business. So what parts stuck out? Well, he's actually very interested in virtual reality. Luckily, he never got involved with that. He knows a lot about it. He knows that it's not good enough for commercial use at the moment. He talks about why Ultima was better than Wizardry, basically saying yes, because every Ultima game I had to start over again, and that kept things fresh, while Wizardry and Might and Magic stayed pretty much the same. And there's of course talk about Ultima Online, which become his biggest hit ever. And but what's also in the pipeline is Ultima 9, one of the least favorite Ultima games, and he talks a lot about how it's the third game in the third trilogy, and that would be the ending of the Ultima series before Ultima Online. And apparently, according to him, it's very nostalgic. But even though Edge gave a 9 for the game later on, it wasn't very well received. So there's also talk about Diablo, how he really likes it. If it hadn't been released by them, he's definitely looking forward to it, and he's not afraid that Diablo would take over the Ultima games because Ultima has much more depth. But he thinks Diablo is great as an online game. I didn't see this one coming. Terry Pratchett apparently actually plays video games. He knows them quite well. He has some good criticism of Wing Commander 4, Doom, and Prince of Persia. He worked very closely with Discworld 1 and 2 apparently, and there's some small complaints about Discworld 1. Here's some funny pictures of him. He would go on to pass away 20 years later, but interesting to know that he knows so much about video games. The Discworld games were mildly funny, side-scrolling click-and-carry adventures, by the way, based on the books. So here's some pre-screen alphas. A lot of games never been released. I'm only going to point out the games that I know that have been released, and I'd like to believe I know a lot of games like Race Storm, but even then, this is pretty obscure stuff. Fatal Fury 5 and Samurai Showdown 3, I presume? No, Samurai Showdown 4 being shown in Fatal Fury 5, which I only know because they're sequels to greater games. Tobal 2 being shown, and Manx TT for the Saturn would be released. We see here this Under Pressure game I don't think it was actually released. And where we have Yoshi's Story, I think it was called, yeah. The Nintendo 64 one, and of course Ocarina of Time. We now have the town. Link looking a little bit older than he did in the game. Still not finished though. Excalibur 2555 AD was a. This is a preview of the game, and Edge seems to like what they see. It's made in the UK. That's probably why it was covered, but it was a very lackluster title at the time. Action-adventure game, somewhat like Zelda, but definitely not as good. Bad controls. Wrecking Crew, a very cute racing game, hardly known. Again, gets a 2-page feature because Edge is much more related to UK developers than other countries. It's it's a racing game, kind of like Destruction Derby, but seems to be more faster paced. It used 2D sprites. Not worth looking into. Speedster, I couldn't find anything about this game. Also made in the UK. Looks a bit like Micro Machines. Made by Synosis, I guess, but hard to find on the internet. Wild Choppers. This game was released under another name for the Nintendo 64, but it's made by Seta. At first I thought it was made by Sega. I thought, what? Not hardly anything to be found on the internet about this other than the name change. Dynamite Soccer 64 never released outside the UK. It's a Japanese game, and Edge says, how is it going to beat the fantastic International Superstar Soccer or the FIFA game, which isn't that good, but even that is well produced. Unreal, here we have another fascinating piece, although you'd expect more to be told by Cliff Bleszinski. It's mostly Tim Sweeney and James Schmalv talking about the game, and there's a lot of talk about, it's like Quake, but it's so much better lighting. From what I understood, it was easier to use in the Quake engine, so that was good. And yes, it was slightly more advanced, but they say if it's not at least 20% better than the Quake engine, we haven't done our job. If you ask me, it wasn't even 20% better, but here's some talk about them probably releasing the game for the 64DD, not for the cartridge, because they want to make sure it's as close to the PC game as possible. And Cliff saying how the game should be like a really souped up car compared to Quake, and that they would like to have lots of gore. But nevertheless, a very important game in the history of video games because the engine would be used for Deus Ex, among others. Street Fighter 3 being shown for the first time, and Edge is not blown away by its graphics. Even, when I think of Street Fighter 3, I think of the fantastic animation, and Edge doesn't seem to like it that much. I don't know what's up with them. I didn't play the original Street Fighter 3 that much because to me it didn't feel that much better than the alpha games that were being played at the same time. I did give it some goes, but the new characters, I thought they were ugly. Alex was this weird-looking guy. He's supposed to be like the main character, although everybody played Ryu. That was another reason why I didn't play Street Fighter 3 that much. Everybody played Ryu and Ken, and that annoyed me. There were other characters. I kind of liked Oro, but I preferred playing Guile, who also used a similar style. And 12 was my favorite character, oddly enough, because he was the only one who actually seemed a bit different. But he seemed to be like kind of like Dhalsim, I guess, with a big kick. Anyhow, there's also talk about Resident Evil 2, which was twice as big as the original. They let you go outside, for example. So that's where Capcom's money went into and was received in the late 90s. Hey, here's Scud Race. A lot like Daytona, but you get 4 cars instead of 1. A lot of different tracks, but not as much personality as the original Daytona, fortunately. So, yeah, I don't think it was never released for the Dreamcast. Not a big title. So, hey, here Edge reflects on 1996-97. Yeah, it's a nice summary of the year. I don't feel like that much can be said. There's some talk about the controversies. I did like reading the little answers to the questions of some of the more important people in the business. Maybe if I zoom up enough, you could read it for yourself. There's a question, favorite Spice Girl, Zove. This is very 1996, you know. Yeah, the Jaguar finally ending its run. Virtual Boy doing pretty much nothing in 1996, even though it was only released a year earlier. And some of the more important games are highlighted, like Civilization 2, Knights, we have Tekken 2, Resident Evil, Command & Conquer Red Alert, of course Mario 64, Syndicate Wars is even nodded at. The biggest disappointments to them are Shadows of the Empire, rightfully so, Ridge Racer Revolution, Cruising USA, Time Commando, made by the people who made Little Big Adventure, and they even mentioned Crash Bandicoot being a disappointment, even though it plays pretty well, but they say it's too much like a 2D game, and I have to agree with them. So, we'll talk about this is speculation of 1997. The M2 might be released. The other 3 will continue on like they're going. There's no clear winner, even though the PlayStation is doing better than the Saturn. And PCs, well, with their MMX chip, the moderns, the 3D accelerated cards, they're going to improve drastically, and they sure did during the late 90s. By 2004, they would be just as good as consoles for playing games. And most promising games, were they right? Final Fantasy VII, yips. Unreal, yips. Zelda 64, it'll take another year. But yeah, D2, not so much. Would be ready to release for the Dreamcast. Monkey Island 3, I don't think that was very big. Manx TT, nah. Resident Evil 2, yeah, that was very good. Virtua Fighter 3 was not released for the Saturn and wasn't that popular in Dreamcast either. Star Fox 64 was very popular. And GTI Club, unfortunately, never released for a console, but at least not at the time. Very good arcade game, though. New media, more phones at the time. Is this a fax machine or something? I don't know what it is. Some manga called, anime called Suikoden apparently, but it's not related to the video game. SFX, the magazine, has a CD-ROM so you get your geek news. 12-speed CD-ROMs apparently. Projector, some music by bands I don't know. And a book called Silicon Snake Oil about how real life is better than the virtual life. Even 1997 people were coming to terms with that. Now we have a good hybrid, if you ask me. Mario Kart 64 gets an 8. The only thing they don't like is how simple the tracks are, and I have to agree with them. Mario 64 has really bad tracks. A lot of them are simple ovals. Rainbow Road is just pure boredom. This one with the highway is annoying. I like the Mario. I like Bowser's Castle a bit. I liked the GP circuits a bit, but again, also Wario Stadium is just so long and boring. It's just not fun. So yeah, I kind of liked it at the time. But 4-player, Deathmatch was okay. I preferred 1-on-1, and the Super Nintendo, to be honest, was much more suspenseful. So yeah, it was a good product, and Edge gives it an 8. A lot of great games being released this month, by the way. Here we have Turok, maybe not the greatest, but hey, this was just as good as Quake 1 and on your console. So that was amazing. Lots of fog, of course. Gets a 9 out of 10. Fantastic animations. And yeah. Edge really loves their Turok. Gives a 9. Here's another fantastic Nintendo 64 game. Third one in a row. J-League Perfect Striker, a.k.a. International Superstar Soccer 64. Gets a 9 out of 10. Easily the best soccer game ever made at the time. Unless you might have preferred the Super Nintendo version. But yeah, good times for Konami football games. Soul Edge being released for the PlayStation finally after 1.5 years in the arcade. Gets a couple extra things. Looks pretty much the same. And I always preferred it to Virtua Fighter. Had more interesting fighting stances. It was a bit faster too. Soul Calibur for the Dreamcast and Soul Calibur 2 would become huge hits. This was also a hit at the time. Rage Racer, the not released for the arcade, but for the PlayStation 1. It's more of a, has a bit of a career mode, if I remember correctly. And it's more strategic racing. So Edge gives it an 8, reinvigorating the series. After this, it would take a while before there would be a big hit. Although Ridge Racer 4 was very popular. I never played it though. Here we have Diablo, and only gets a 7. Why that? Because Edge thinks it's a little bit too simple. It's just plowing through enemies. Well, yeah, but the game is very good at that. Especially at the time, it was so much fun to go online and play with other people. Get the loot, and people are still doing it. Diablo 2, which is kind of more the same of Diablo 1, is still very popular. Diablo 3 is also popular, especially on the consoles. So beginning of a great series. Yeah, Edge only giving a 7. Sometimes they did that. Fighters Mega Mix. They combined Virtua Fighter 2 and 1 and what's it called again? The other one, Fighting Vipers. So a lot of fighters together. Most people still prefer playing Virtua Fighter 2, but if you wanted to have more characters duking that, get this. Got an 8 out of 10. Cool Board is for the PlayStation, not as good as 1080, but still pretty good. Gets a 6. Reloaded, the sequel to Loaded, top-down shooter, kind of like Smash TV, gets a 5 out of 10. More of the same, they say. NBA in the Zone 2, Konami's basketball game, gets a 7 out of 10. Not as good as the British effort or NBA Live. Tetris Plus for the Saturn gets a 6. Multiplayer Tetris is always good. Amok, a 3D shooting game, gets a 6 for the Saturn. Crusader No Remorse, released now for the PlayStation, gets a 7. Let me zoom in a little bit. NBA Jam Extreme, Edge really likes it, gives a 10 out of 10, but I definitely preferred Hang Time for the Nintendo 64. It was much smoother, more options, you can make your own character, more strategic even. This was just slow and it looked ugly. Tempest X, well, I never realized this, but apparently the PlayStation 1 version is better than Tempest 2000 on the Jaguar, so get this if you can, because it's totally awesome. Jeff Minter's greatest game. Flying Core for the PC apparently gets an 8. Very technical flying game featuring old planes. So that's a lot of great games being released in 1 month. Let's hurry things up. Oh no, we have plenty of time. I've been doing quite well. So let's look at the advertisements. This one looks rather fancy. It's that submarine game again by Criterion. All these companies are mostly British, so you might not know all of them. Here you go. And again, the Rare commercial, they would always do one. Being the biggest ultimate play of the game was their old name. Here you have Tekken 3. So, this is the arcade version. I thought it was a nice improvement over Tekken 2. Aesthetically, mostly. The music was more up-tempo, more rock and roll. The characters looked cooler. But they switched a lot of characters to make them more balanced, more interesting. It seemed to play a little bit tighter too, more in your face. Yeah, one of the first Tekken game I actually enjoyed, and I thought it was just as good as Virtua Fighter 2. Although I still definitely preferred playing Street Fighter at the time. Call me weird, I actually didn't really like Tekken that much until Tekken 4, when it was actually trying to be Virtua Fighter. I still preferred Soul Calibur. Namco Museum number 5, the 5th volume, with hardly any interesting games. Probably the best one would be Pac-Mania, which wasn't a hit anyway. Apparently popular with women, according to Edge. The rest of the games I hardly recognize, which says something, because I spent a lot of time in the arcades in the 80s. But Legend of Valkyrie was only released in Japan, so now you can play it. It's kind of like Zelda, apparently, so that might be interesting. Here you have the letters. So what did they write again? Somebody saying Edge is biased towards Nintendo 64, and Edge again defending themselves, saying, hey, we just like what we like, and then we write about that. One person saying that, replying to their own letter, saying, yeah, okay, I guess you're right. 10 isn't the same as perfect, it's just the highest level you can expect. Somebody asking saying about how hard it is to choose the right video card for your PC. Let's see. One of the better letters discusses how the 2D fighting games are more popular in the arcade with the hardcore, and that was definitely the case still at the time. And Edge seems to definitely prefer the 3D fighting games. And this writer says, no, that's for people who prefer looking at such graphics, and there's more to a fighting game than that, and Edge actually agrees with that. There's also talk about the Yaruzi being not very smart, because you're just better off using a personal computer for making games than a 550-pound system. I have to agree. I don't think many games were made with this. I couldn't find them, at least. And one person talking about, hey, Tomb Raider, that dinosaur really scared me, and Doom also scared me, so Biohazard also. So maybe, yeah, virtual reality is ready to be a main attraction to really scare people. But, yeah, even the letter says, I don't know if it's commercially viable, and it wasn't. Some talk about RGB inputs. Let's see, the M2, will it be a success? And how can you play American games in Europe for the Nintendo 64? So that were the questions of the times in early 1997. Next time we'll be looking at, yes, Power Crystal for the M2, which wasn't released. Edge has especially back then, had a very good track record of covering games that never were released, or actually big flops. I guess at the time they thought, well, we'll have the other magazines cover the big, huge successes. We'll look into the other things that other people aren't writing about. And there will also be some talk about 3D graphics on the computer. Rubik's Cube has been solved, and as you already guessed, you see Edge. And the Ferrari F40, as seen in Scud. And that was Edge 42. So it's good to have you again. It took me a while to make this one because I've been very busy. I hope to make a couple next week. So I'll see you then.